Section 19 of Inca Lands. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Michelle. Inca Lands by Hiram Bingham. Chapter 11. The Search Continued. Part 1. Machu Picchu was on the borderline between the temperate zone and the tropics. Camping near the bridge of San Miguel, below the ruins, both Mr. Heller and Mr. Cook found interesting evidences of this fact in the flora and fauna. From the point of view of historical geography, Mr. Cook's most important discovery was the presence here of huilca, a tree which does not grow in cold climates. The Quichua dictionaries tell us that huilca is a medicine, a purgative. An infusion made from the seeds of the tree is used as an enema. I am indebted to Mr. Cook for calling my attention to two articles by Mr. W. E. Safford, in which it is also shown that from seeds of the huilca a powder is prepared, sometimes called cohoba. This powder, says Mr. Safford, is a narcotic snuff, inhaled through the nostrils by means of a bifurcated tube. All writers unite in declaring that it induced a kind of intoxication or hypnotic state, accompanied by visions which were regarded by the natives as supernatural. While under its influence, the necromancers, or priests, were supposed to hold communication with unseen powers, and their incoherent mutterings were regarded as prophecies or revelations of hidden things. In treating the sick, the physicians make use of it to discover the cause of the malady, or the person or spirit by whom the patient was bewitched. Mr. Safford quotes Las Casas as saying, "It was an interesting spectacle to witness how they took it and what they spake. The chief began the ceremony, and while he was engaged all remained silent. When he had snuffed up the powder through his nostrils, he remained silent for a while, with his head inclined to one side and his arms placed on his knees. Then he raised his face heavenward, uttering certain words which must have been his prayer to the true God, or to him whom he held as God. After which all responded almost as we do when we say Amen, and this they did with a loud voice or sound. Then they gave thanks and said to him certain complimentary things, entreating his benevolence and begging him to reveal to them what he had seen. He described to them his vision, saying that the simi, or spirits, had spoken to him and had predicted good times, or the contrary, or that children were to be born or to die, or that there was to be some dispute with their neighbors, and other things which might come to his imagination, all disturbed with that intoxication. Clearly, from the point of view of priests and soothsayers, the place where huilca was first found and used in their incantations would be important. It is not strange to find, therefore, that the Inca name of this river was Huilca-mayu, the Huilca River. The pampa on this river where the trees grew would likely receive the name Huilcapampa. If it became an important city, the surrounding region might be named Huilcapampa after it. This seems to me the most probable origin of the name of the province. Anyhow, it is worth noting the fact that denizens of Cuzco and Ollantaytambo, coming down the river in search of this highly prized narcotic, must have found the first trees not far from Machu Picchu. Leaving the ruins of Machu Picchu for later investigation, we now push down the Urubamba Valley, cross the bridge of San Miguel, past the house of Señor Lizarraga, first of the modern Peruvians to write his name on the granite walls of Machu Picchu, and came to the sugarcane fields of Huadquiña. We now had left the temperate zone and entered the tropics. At Huadquiña we were so fortunate as to find the proprietress of the plantation, Señora Carmen Vargas, and her children were spending the season here. During the rainy winter months they live in Cuzco, but when summer brings fine weather they come to Huadquiña to enjoy the free and easy life of the country. They made us welcome, not only with that hospitality to passing travelers which is common to sugar estates all over the world, but gave us real assistance in our explorations. Señora Carmen's estate covers more than 200 square miles. Huadquiña is a splendid example of the ancient patriarchal system. The Indians who come from other parts of Peru to work on the plantation enjoy perquisites and wages unknown elsewhere. Those whose home is on this estate regard Señora Carmen
with an affectionate reverence which she well deserves. All are welcome to bring her their troubles. The system goes back to the days when the spiritual, moral, and material welfare of the Indians was entrusted in encomienda to the lords of the repartimento, or allotted territory. Huadquiña once belonged to the Jesuits. They planted the first sugar cane and established the mill. After their expulsion from the Spanish colonies at the end of the 18th century, Huadquiña was bought by a Peruvian. It was first described in geographical literature by the Comte de Sartiges, who stayed there for several weeks. In 1834, when on his way to Choqquequirau, he says that the owner of Huadquiña is perhaps the only landed proprietor in the entire world who possesses on his estates all the products of the 4 parts of the globe. In the different regions of his domain he has wool, hides, horsehair, potatoes, wheat, corn, sugar, coffee, chocolate, coca, many mines of silver bearing lead, and places of gold. Truly a royal principality. Incidentally, it is interesting to note that although Sartiges was an enthusiastic explorer, eager to visit the undescribed Inca ruins, he makes no mention whatever of Machu Picchu. Yet from Huadquiña one can reach Machu Picchu on foot in half a day without crossing the Urubamba River. Apparently the ruins were unknown to his hosts in 1834. They were equally unknown to our kind hosts in 1911. They scarcely believed the story I told them of the beauty and extent of the Inca edifices. When my photographs were developed, however, and they saw with their own eyes the marvelous stonework of the principal temples, Señora Carmen and her family were struck dumb with wonder and astonishment. They could not understand how it was possible that they should have passed so close to Machu Picchu every year of their lives since the river road was opened without knowing what was there. They had seen a single little building on the crest of the ridge, but supposed that it was an isolated tower of no great interest or importance. Their neighbor Lizarraga, near the bridge of San Miguel, had reported the presence of the ruins which he first visited in 1904, but like our friends in Cuzco, they had paid little attention to his stories. We were soon to have a demonstration of the causes of such skepticism.
Our new friends read with interest my copy of those paragraphs of Calancha's Chronicle which referred to the location of the last Inca capital. Learning that we were anxious to discover Uiticos, a place of which they had never heard, they ordered the most intelligent tenants on the estate to come in and be questioned. The best informed of all was a sturdy mestizo, a trusted foreman, who said that in a little valley called Ccllumayu, a few hours' journey down the Urubamba, there were important ruins which had been seen by some of Señor Carmen's Indians. Even more interesting and thrilling was the statement that on a ridge up the Salcantay Valley was a place called Yurak Rumi, Yurak meaning white, Rumi meaning stone. There were some very interesting ruins that had been found by his workmen when cutting trees for firewood. We all became excited over this, for among the paragraphs which I had copied from Calancha's Chronicle was the statement that close to Uiticos is the white stone of the aforesaid House of the Sun, which is called Yurak Rumi. Our host assured us that this must be the place, since no one hereabouts had ever heard of any other Yurak Rumi. The foreman, on being closely questioned, said that he had seen the ruins once or twice, that he had also been up the Urubamba Valley, and had seen the great ruins at Ollantaytambo, and that those which he had seen at Yurak Rumi were as good as those at Ollantaytambo. Here was some definite statement made by an eyewitness. Apparently, we were about to see that interesting rock where the last Incas worshipped. However, the foreman said that the trail thither was at present impassable, although a small gang of Indians could open it in less than a week. Our hosts, excited by the pictures we had shown them of Machu Picchu, and now believing that even finer ruins might be found on their own property, immediately gave orders to have the path to the Yurak Rumi cleared for our benefit. While this was being done, Señora Carmen's son, the manager of the plantation, offered to accompany us himself to Ccllumayu, where other important ruins had been found, which could be reached in a few hours without cutting any new trails. Acting on his assurance that we should not need tents or cots, we left our camping outfit behind and followed him to a small valley on the south side of the Urubamba. We found Ccllumayu to consist of 2 huts in a small clearing. Densely wooded slopes rose on all sides. The manager requested 2 of the Indian tenants to act as guides. With them we plunged into the thick jungle and spent a long and fatiguing day searching in vain for ruins. That night the manager returned to Huadquiña, but Professor Foote and I prepared to remain in Ccllumayu and prosecute a more vigorous search on the next day. we shared a little thatched hut with our Indian host and a score of fat coyis, guinea pigs, the chief source of the Ccllumayu meat supply. The hut was built of rough wattles which admitted plenty of fresh air and gave us comfortable ventilation. Primitive little sleeping platforms, also of wattles, constructed for the needs of short, stocky Indians, kept us from being overrun by inquisitive coyis, but could hardly be called as comfortable as our own folding cots, which we had left at Huadquiña. The next day our guides were able to point out in the woods a few piles of stones, the foundations of oval or circular huts, which probably were built by some primitive savage tribe in prehistoric times. Nothing further could be found here of ruins, important or otherwise, although we spent 3 days at Ccllumayu. Such was our first disillusionment. On our return to Huadquiña we learned that the trail to Yurak would be ready in a day or two. In the meantime, our hosts became much interested in Professor Foote's collection of insects. They brought an unnamed scorpion and informed us that an orange orchard surrounded by high walls in a secluded place back of the house was a great place for spiders. We found that their statement was not exaggerated and immediately engaged in an enthusiastic spider hunt. When these Huadquiña spiders were studied at the Harvard Museum of Comparative Zoology, Dr. Chamberlain found among them the representatives of 4 new genera and 19 species, hitherto unknown to science. As a reward of merit, he gave Professor Foote's name to the scorpion.
Finally, the trail to Yurak was reported finished. It was with feelings of keen anticipation that I started out with the foreman to see those ruins which he had just revisited and now declared were better than those at Ollantaytambo. It was to be presumed that in the pride of discovery he might have exaggerated their importance. Still, it never entered my head what I was actually to find. After several hours spent in clearing away the dense forest growth which surrounded the walls, I learned that this Yurak consisted of the ruins of a single little rectangular Inca storehouse. No effort had been made at beauty of construction. The walls were of rough, unfashioned stones laid in clay. The building was without a doorway, although it had several small windows and a series of ventilating shafts under the house. The lintels of the windows and of the small apertures leading into the subterranean shafts were of stone. There were no windows on the sunny north side, nor on the ends, but there were 4 on the south side through which it would have been possible to secure access to the stores of maize, potatoes, or other provisions placed there for safekeeping. It will be recalled that the Incas maintained an extensive system of public storehouses, not only in the centers of population but also at strategic points on the principal trails. Yurak was at the top of the ridge between the Salcantay and the Huadquiña valleys, probably on an ancient road which crossed the province of Uilcapampa. As such, it was interesting, but to compare it with Ollantaytambo, as the foreman had done, was to liken a cottage to a palace or a mouse to an elephant. It seemed incredible that anybody actually having seen both places could have thought for a moment that one was as good as the other. To be sure, the foreman was not a trained observer, and his interest in Inca buildings was probably of the slightest. Yet the ruins of Ollantaytambo were so well known and so impressive that even the most casual traveler is struck by them, and the natives themselves are enormously proud of them. The real cause of the foreman's inaccuracy was probably his desire to please. To give an answer which will satisfy the questioner is a common trait in Peru as well as in many other parts of the world. Anyhow, the lessons of the past few days were not lost on us. We now understood the skepticism which prevailed regarding Lizarraga's discoveries. It is small wonder that the occasional stories about Machu Picchu which had drifted into Cuzco had never elicited any enthusiasm, nor even provoked investigation on the part of those professors and students in the University of Cuzco who were interested in visiting the remains of Inca civilization. They knew only too well the fondness of their countrymen for exaggeration and their inability to report facts accurately. Obviously, we had not yet found Uiticos, so bidding farewell to Señora Carmen, we crossed the Urubamba on the bridge of Colpani and proceeded down the valley past the mouth of the Lucumayo and the road from Panticalla to the hamlet of Chauyay, where the Urubamba is joined by the Vilcabamba River. Both rivers are restricted here to narrow gorges, through which their waters rush and roar on their way to the lower valley. A few rods from Chauyay was a fine bridge. The natives called it the Chuquichaca. Steel and iron have suspended the old suspension bridge of huge cables made of vegetable fiber. with its narrow roadway of wattle supported by a network of vines. Yet here it was that in 1572 the military force sent by the Viceroy Francesco de Toledo, under the command of General Martin Hurtado and Captain Garcia, found the forces of the young Inca drawn up to defend Uiticos. It will be remembered that after a brief preliminary fire the forces of Tupac Amaru were routed without having destroyed the bridge, and thus Captain Garcia was enabled to accomplish that which had proved too much for the famous Gonzalo Pizarro. Our inspection of the surroundings showed that Captain Garcia's companion, Baltazar del Campo, was correct when he said that the occupation of the bridge of Chuquichaca was a measure of no small importance for the royal force. It certainly would have caused the Spaniards great trouble if they had had to rebuild it. We might now have proceeded to follow Garcia's tracks up the Vilcabamba, had we not been anxious to see the proprietor of the plantation of Santa Ana, Don Pedro Duque, reported to be the wisest and ablest man in this whole province. We felt that he would be able to offer us advice of prime importance in our search. So, leaving the bridge of Chuquichaca, we continued down the Urubamba River, which here meanders through a broad, fertile valley green with tropical plantations. We passed groves of bananas and oranges, waving fields of green sugar cane, the hospitable dwellings of prosperous planters, and the huts of Indians fortunate enough to dwell in this tropical Garden of Eden. The day was hot and thirst provoking, so I stopped near some large orange trees loaded with ripe fruit, and asked the Indian proprietress to sell me 10 cents worth. In exchange for the tiny silver reel, she dragged out a sack containing more than 50 oranges. I was fain to request her to permit us to take only as many as our pockets could hold, but she seemed so surprised and pained that we had to fill our saddlebags as well. At the end of the day we crossed the Urubamba River on a fine steel bridge, and found ourselves in the prosperous little town of Quillabamba, provincial capital. Its main street was lined with well-filled shops, evidence of the fact that this was one of the principal gateways to the Peruvian rubber country, which, with the high price of rubber then prevailing in 1911, was the scene of unusual activity. Passing through Quillabamba and up a slight hill beyond it, we came to the long colonnades of the celebrated sugar estate of Santa Ana, founded by the Jesuits, where all explorers who have passed this way since the days of Charles Wiener have been entertained. He says that he was received here with 1,000 signs of friendship, mille témoignages d'amitié. We were received the same way, even in a region where we had repeatedly received valuable assistance from government officials and generous hospitalities from private individuals. Our reception at Santa Ana stands out as particularly delightful. Don Pedro Duque took great interest in enabling us to get all possible information about the little-known region into which we proposed to penetrate. Born in Colombia, but long resident in Peru, he was a gentleman of the old school, keenly interested not only in the administration and economic progress of his plantation, but also the intellectual movements of the outside world. He entered in zest into our historical geographical studies. The name Uiticos was new to him, but after reading over with us our extracts from the Spanish chronicles, he was sure that he could help us find it, and help us he did. Santa Ana was less than 13 degrees south of the equator. The elevation is barely 2,000 feet, and the winter nights are cool, but the heat in the middle of the day is intense. Nevertheless, our host was so energetic that as a result of his efforts, a number of the best informed residents were brought to the conferences at the great plantation house. They told him all they knew of the towns and valleys where the last 4 Incas had found a refuge, but that was not much. They all agreed that if only Señor Lopez Torres were alive he could have been of great service to us, as he had prospected for mines and rubber in those parts more than anyone else, and had once seen some Inca ruins in the forest. Of Uiticos and Chuquipalpa, and most of the places mentioned in the chronicles, none of Don Pedro's friends had heard. It was all rather discouraging, until one day, by the greatest good fortune, there arrived in Santa Ana another friend of Don Pedro's, the teniente gobernador of the village of Lucma in the valley of Vilcabamba, a crusty old feather named Evaristo Mogrovejo. His brother, Pio Mogrovejo, had been a member of the party of energetic Peruvians who, in 1884, had searched for buried treasure at Choqquequirau, and had left their names on its walls. Evaristo Mogrovejo could understand searching for buried treasure, but he was totally unable otherwise to comprehend our desire to find the ruins of places mentioned by Father Calancha and the contemporaries of Captain Garcia. Had we met Mogrovejo in Lucma, he would undoubtedly have received us with suspicion and done nothing to further our quest. Fortunately for us, his official superior was a sub-prefect of the province of Convención, lived at Quillabamba near Santa Ana, and was a friend of Don Pedro's. The sub-prefect had received orders from his own official superior, the prefect of Cuzco, to take a personal interest in our undertaking, and accordingly gave particular orders to Mogrovejo to see to it that we were given every facility for finding the ancient ruins and identifying the places of historic interest. Although Mogrovejo declined to risk his skin in the savage wilderness of Conservidayoc, he carried out his orders faithfully and was ultimately of great assistance to us. End of section 19.